Thank you for downloading from Digital Mindfulness. This is episode number 33. This episode of Digital Mindfulness is sponsored by Semantica Research, a leading digital consultancy helping communications, social media, and marketing professionals make better and more informed decisions from digital data. My guest today is Rohan Gunatillake, Director of Mindfulness Everywhere, a creative studio that combines meditation, technology, and design. Mindfulness Everywhere is best known for creating Buddhify, the mindfulness app for modern life, which has topped the charts in over 40 different countries. Rohan has an extensive background in mindfulness-based meditation and has worked for over 10 years in technology and innovation for the likes of IBM and Accenture. Rohan is also a trustee of the British Council, and in 2012, Wired named him in their smart list of 50 people who will change the world. Rohan's first book has just been published, which is entitled This Is Happening. I hope you enjoy this episode with Rohan Gunatillake. So Rohan, welcome to the show. Welcome to Digital Mindfulness. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on. At last, I've been trying to sync our calendars up for many, many moons now, and it's a pleasure to have you on.
Great, thanks, Lawrence. Likewise, it's super fun to be on.
So, Rohan, can you tell the audience a little bit more about yourself? How did you come to be working and having a really great interest at the vanguard of this intersection between mindfulness and technology?
I guess all by accident, really. So I got into meditation and mindfulness myself at the end of my time at university. So for about 12, 13 years, I've been practicing meditation, and the key thing was that the time I started meditating was at the same time I started working in London for like a big classic management consultancy. So I was on one hand training in what is a medieval monastic Buddhist system, and then on the other hand I was working in a fast-paced corporate digital environment and had a busy social life and all the stuff that comes with that. And given that the style of meditation that I was doing, and indeed sort of continue the tradition that I train in, didn't really have models or language or practices that really mapped really well against a fast-paced digital, urban, relational, social life, right? So I had a choice. I either compartmentalized my practice into this thing that was not connected to the rest of my life, or I just combined them and worked out for myself how to make those two things work. And so my own personal practice was very much all at the beginning, I used to call it urban meditation. So in contrast to what you might call forest or monastic practice. So learning how to develop concentration, compassion, or self-awareness whilst in London at the time. I now live in Scotland, but at the time I was in London. So that was happening just in my personal life. And then along the while, I was working in technology and then sort of innovation. And then after about 10 years of effectively being a consultant, a point came where I was like, I'm bored of helping other people make stuff. I know how to do this now. So I had a great network of digital and designer talent. I'd learned a lot around innovation practice and service design and all these sort of things that are really useful when designing products. And then I decided so I decided I was really interested in making my own product, and it naturally made sense that it was to do with meditation, mindfulness, given that that was the area that I had a lot of expertise in, and particularly this whole thing about urban practice. And then ultimately, it was sort of an inevitable thing when this was about 2011, I guess, and lots of people were, lots of my friends would say, I'm really interested in this meditation and mindfulness thing, but it's too hippie and I don't have time. And as a person who worked in innovation and design, I realized, and someone who had a long urban meditation practice, I realized those two things, the time problem and the hippie problem, were not intrinsic to practice. They were merely design challenges. So the first app we made, which was called Buddhify, I designed specifically to solve those two problems. And then out of that, the first prototype version of Buddhify, I literally made it on like some savings and spare time. And it did surprisingly well. And then I took all the money from that and created the newer version on Buddhify, which is the one which is in app stores at the moment. And that has continued to do really well and has allowed me to effectively build a company around making well-designed mindfulness products for people for whom conventional mindfulness interventions don't quite work for them.
Gosh, so the hippie problem and the time problem, and these are the two main challenges that you saw that were holding people back from, like you said, incorporating mindfulness into their busy lives. I'm really interested with regards to the Buddhify app, and we'll come back to this a bit later. But how well did that do globally?
Sure. So basically, Buddhify has done well enough to mean that I can run a company with a couple of people that make mindfulness products full time, which is insane. Like the fact that this is my job is just ridiculous. And also like it's done well to the sense that it's been the number one health and fitness app in 45 countries. Just this week, BuzzFeed named it the best meditation app around. We've had loads of really good press, and it's all pretty much been word of mouth. We're a tiny company, sort of entirely self-funded. We don't do lots of PR or marketing, so we really rely on our players just having a really good experience and them telling their friends about how useful it's been. And that's sort of, we've sort of grown through that organic word of mouth, which is priceless, really.
When you were working in London doing consulting, could you see yourself being where you are right now? I guess my real question is, could you see the beginning streams of this groundswell coming up, this move towards being mindful in a hyper-connected society?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think because I effectively placed a bet. I've been placing bets on this whole area growing, and all the work we do is just we're constantly doubling down on our belief that this whole area, whether you call it mindfulness or well-being, mental well-being, is sort of a broad public conversation, an area of interest, and particularly an area of interest with a growing market for consumer products. There's two things. One is the growth of mindfulness over the last 5 to 10 years has just been really predicated by the amount of scientific research into it. Because once you have that kind of data, it's very, very different to just some Tibetan bald guys telling you that this stuff is good for you versus a pile of, you'll have seen this classic sort of graph of the number of research papers related to mindfulness every year for the last 20 years, and it's just a massive hockey stick. And as soon as you have relatively rigorous scientific data, that opens up companies being interested in it, opens up the healthcare aspect, it opens up people who are skeptical about it. Because the people who are interested from a spiritual perspective or more of a hippie perspective will always get interested in it. But these other audiences needed other types of marketing, and data has basically been the marketing tool, the most important marketing tool for mindfulness in recent times. So that's on the sort of one side. And on the other side, as your as this podcast has documents really well, the fact that life isn't getting any easier, right?
Yeah.
So you got both these two things coming together, and the fact that what's allowed me and my company to enter the space has been, I guess, the relatively cheap cost of production of products, and the fact that we hold quite a rare skill set, which is a really deep understanding of mindfulness, as well as a pretty deep understanding of design and product and technology. And so that's why I'm optimistic for this space, is that we've always had people with deep meditation practice, but we've not had a lot of people who have that experience and also are software designers or UX designers or whatever they are. But now we're starting to see more people with what I call this twin literacy of a digital literacy and a mindfulness literacy. And then I just happen to express that through my company and our products, and other people will express it in different ways. And that's why I'm sort of excited and optimistic about this whole area.
Fabulous. And kind of going on from that, in these mindfulness products, you've also just published a new book, which is called This Is Happening.
It is. It's pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great title. And it's, of course, now on Amazon. And I was wondering if you can tell us...
And other bookstores with real buildings. Although Amazon are launching a bookstore with a real building as well. So when I started Buddhify and the company, I never thought we were purely a app company. I was very much driven by the idea that you create the product in the medium that is most appropriate. So Buddhify solves a problem in a very specific way for people, and using the phone is the exact perfect way to do that. But in This Is Happening, there's, as well as all the practical guidance and exercises and explanations of mindfulness, practical stuff that the app also has to a certain extent. I'm able to share the sort of the theory and principles and history and thinking behind this whole area, which isn't necessarily appropriate for an app, which requires more of a direct experience straight away. So it's inappropriate to do a sort of quick history of mindfulness when someone wants to just listen to a meditation whilst they're on the train. But it's something that I can include in the book. And books are still really important, right? Like they're probably still the number. Like if you look at the whole category of whether you call it pop psychology, self-help, mind, body, spirit, mindfulness itself, it's such a massive category for publishing. And so a lot of people still use books for finding their way through this stuff. So it made a lot of sense for me to write one, and I was very fortunate to have a great publisher, an agent, to support me on the way to do that. And importantly, one of the things when planning the book might be interesting to know is that, Lawrence, as you know, like within Buddhify, the whole conceit of that is that you practice in every situation. So there are tracks for when you're on the train and eating and working online and so on. Mm-hmm. So with the book, I was like, how do you actually... Because one of my problems with... one of my motivations for writing This Is Happening was also the fact that I found, despite how many mindfulness books there are out there, a lot of them are just the same. Mm-hmm. They basically say the same thing again and again, a little bit conservatively, and didn't necessarily reflect a very progressive perspective of mindfulness. And so I wanted to, if I was to write a mindfulness book, I just didn't want to write just another mindfulness book. I wanted to bring something new to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And so this whole thing around how do you have a genuine mindfulness practice when you actually don't have time for formal sitting? How do you practice mindfulness when you have a very active digital life? Like solving those problems were really important. And this whole, something I really hate about, I guess, a lot of mindfulness books is you'll often find gray boxes. So I don't know, sort of where you'll read a whole section and then there'll be a practice like in a gray box. going, now go and sit quietly for 20 minutes and do this exercise. And like, no one does that, right? Like, who does that? As soon as I see a gray box in a book, I just ignore it and move on to the next bit. And so one of the tricks we tried to pull off was, can you actually practice, do all that stuff whilst reading the meat of the book? So I introduce core techniques which you're literally doing whilst you're reading it. So you don't have to, if you read the book, you're practicing mindfulness, which is sort of the trick we tried to pull off, and I think we managed to do it.
So what I'd really like to do is just to kind of delve a little bit deeper into the book itself, because you're right, there are absolutely loads of books on meditation in the market already. But one of the things that you really emphasized in the book is this idea of mobile meditation. I was wondering if you can tell the audience what mobile meditation is and why it's so important to be present in the digital age, because surely the world just wants us with our digital devices to just speed up.
Sure. So taking that first bit, the conventional way of presenting meditation is predominantly formal meditation. So it's a thing that sort of sitting meditation, going to a quiet, special place for 10, 20, 30 minutes. And then the assumption when they teach you, when that is the way of teaching, is that the benefits of that practice will then leak into the rest of your life. The main problem with that is, whilst that can happen, the rest of your life looks very different to that special formal place. Because if you lead a very busy life, then and you're training your mindfulness in an environment that looks nothing like the rest of your life, then a lot of people find it really hard to integrate what they've learned in formal practice into the rest of into the busyness of it all. So mobile meditation simply takes the alternative angle and basically says, how about instead of doing 80% of your meditation practice in a formal way and 20% of it in a mobile way, why don't you actually focus mainly on the mobile practice? So basically learning techniques, genuine, authentic mindfulness techniques, but ones which you're doing when you're at work, when you're talking to your partner, when you're walking around town, when you're taking a break, when you're checking Instagram. Why don't we actually learn how to train mindfulness in the situations where we actually probably need it the most? And then if we want to really deepen that experience, we can then do our formal practice as a sort of way of deepening and supporting our understanding. So mobile practice is really that, the idea of predominantly making the majority of our lives the place we practice meditation. And this solves the time problem that we mentioned before, because if you can't find time for formal practice, that's fine. But there's 16 hours. If you say you assume you sort of sleep for 8 hours a day, if you're lucky, then there are 16 hours. I'm saying that through mobile mindfulness and really getting an understanding of that, you can practice for up to 16 hours a day if you know how. And all you need to know is basically like understanding core techniques and how to then apply those core techniques to all these various activities. So that's the mobile thing. And I think the reason I think it's so important is because it's incredibly accessible, it's fun, it can be playful, and it can take the pressure off having to find time for things. And like as you become more and more proficient in mobile practice, you'll end up probably wanting to do more and more formal practice anyway, or you may not. But if putting all the pressure on sitting meditation, the problem with that is that people just find that really hard to do. Even if you have a lot of dedication, and sometimes life just gets in the way, right? And so the challenge of mobile practice is no longer finding time. The challenge then becomes remembering to do it. And that's an easier problem to solve, actually, than given that time is such a scarce resource. A luxury good. Time is a luxury good is something I often talk about. But the second thing around why we need it in this time, just so many reasons, right? Because just I guess one of the big themes of this podcast is why I sort of one of the reasons I enjoyed listening to so much is this whole question of you've spoken to loads of people who talk about how the people that make our software are designing it in such a way to manipulate our attention and essentially farm our attention into commercial gain, right? Either through advertising or through whatever business model or style of typically through advertising. So the world of advertising and the world of social networks and all these giant companies, they all understand the value of our attention, literally understand the monetary value of our attention. But the real sadness is that we as individuals tend not to. And whilst there are other tools available, absolutely, I think mindfulness, because it is put so much emphasis on awareness and attention, mindfulness is one of the very few tools actually we have available, which allows us to bring a bit more control and agency to how we place our attention, because a lot of the world is trying to manipulate it, and not always for the good. So given that that's happening, why wouldn't you want to develop the skills and capacities to place our attention in ways which are actually beneficial for us?
One of the things you just spoke about here was kind of moving away from what you called grey box exercises that no one does. So that's a great term for it. Because you're right, I tend to skip over these boxes. I think I'll come back to them.
You never do. Yeah, never do.
Never do.
When I like favorite a tweet that I think I'm going to read later, and I totally never do.
But I'm wondering, with this whole idea of mobile meditation, and you use another phrase in the book, which is great, which I think you called it informal meditation.
Yeah, it's typically called informal meditation. So, but the reason I call it mobile is when you call it informal, it makes it sound worse than formal. So there's a value judgment inherent in the word informal, which makes it feel like it's a second-class citizen. So the sitting is the really cool stuff, and everything. All this mobile stuff is just, it's just second-class practice. And I think that's really unfair. Historically, there's lots of really good examples. Historically, all the way back to the origins of mindfulness practice, the idea of doing this stuff in every activity has been fundamental, and it's actually only relatively recently that we've sort of made this form of sitting a very sort of special holy object. And it's still really important. And absolutely, don't get me wrong. Like, I think formal practice is amazing, and I do it all the time, and it's really important. But it's to only consider mindfulness and meditation as being just that is incredibly limiting.
Do you think then that with the more mobile meditation that we do, that this would somehow lessen or weaken our practice? Do you think it's a more shallow form of meditation, or do you think that the more that we do mobile meditation, that the better we get at it?
I think you've raised a really, really important point. I think this idea of if someone finds a technique that helps them in stressful situations at work, and they never do any other form of practice, why do we call that shallow? Like, if I think there's so much of the mindfulness industry is trying to turn us all into meditators rather than trying to solve our problems. I think this is one of my critiques, I guess, of the mindfulness scene at the moment, is that we've valorized the formal meditator, when actually, yes, it is absolutely true that the roots of mindfulness come from a spiritual practice and a religious background, and it's something that I know very well, and I practice in that style. But the problem is that just because it came from that root, people still continue to look through that lens as being the most important thing. So if Rory McIlroy wants to use a mindfulness technique to improve his putting. What's that got to do with any, like, whose business is that to say that that's shallow or like that isn't good enough? Like, it's absolutely, it's, we need to look at, this is the sort of a really sort of fundamental aspect to sort of how we design our products and how we think about mindfulness, is that designing this idea of sort of user-centered design, right? So starting where people are and creating techniques that solve the problem that they have. So if someone has a problem with sleep or with anxiety at work, then let's give them a practice that helps them in that situation. If they then want to explore the wider opportunity and wider landscape that mindfulness and the history of mindfulness has to offer, then that's great. But we don't have to assume that they have to do that, or that that's necessarily the objective. But I think there's I sort of challenge the idea that we all need to become formal meditators that sit for 20 minutes a day. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think what's more interesting and more practical is to give people the tools and skills and techniques to solve the problems that they have. And if they then want to deepen their practice, then that's great. So starting with the user rather than starting with tradition, and this is the reason why we do what we do. So why my company does what we do. So I think the key thing to recognize the difference between starting with the user and starting with tradition. So historically, for example, so let's take digital mindfulness products, right? Apps and so on. So we have a really well-established style of teaching mindfulness, which is the MBSR, so the mindfulness-based stress reduction, or the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy style, which is the classic sort of 6 to 8 week course. You go for 2 hours every week, and then you do your homework every day. And it's a really effective course. There's loads of research into how useful it is for various conditions and so on. And the challenge, the problem is that MBSR course has now become its own holy object. And so when people make products with mindfulness, all they tend to think is, we just have to convert the MBSR course into an online version of it. And what they do is then they make, they make a system where they have lectures, and you do, so we watch loads of lectures, and you do 20 minutes of practice every day, basically like making exactly the same thing as a face-to-face MBSR course, but delivered through digital means. But the problem is, like, the people that isn't necessarily meeting the user where they are, because the majority of a lot of people don't have the time for that. Maybe the reason they haven't gone to they might have been in an MBSR class next door to them, but giving them an app that gives them the same style of intervention isn't necessarily going to help them. So why don't you start with the realities of the user's life and create a product which is much more designed to it? And I think this is the big opportunity that I see, which is we've historically not really used really quite basic design principles in the world of mindfulness. We've just assumed that the traditional way is the best way to do it. And if you can't do it that way, then you're wrong, and we're not wrong, but you're wrong. So for example, another example, like this is quite common, and maybe you come across it yourself, Lawrence. So you go to a class, like a very classic, if you go to a meditation class, the first exercise you'll do is following paying attention to your breath and following it, and so on. That's actually a really hard technique to start with. It often makes the user quite frustrated.
Thank you.
It makes them feel like they don't know what they're doing. So you're basically, the first experience that most people have in mindfulness, in meditation, is a bad one. And that's just incredibly bad design, in my opinion. Why don't we create their first experience to be fun and playful and interesting as much as possible, so that then they start going, okay, how do I explore this more, rather than giving them an experience where 50% of people never come back. because it was too hard, or they felt I couldn't do it. So that's where I think the opportunity lies.
Do you think as well that this is a case of us just starting now to have this conversation? That we're actually just starting to think, okay, look, just simply overlaying traditional approaches through a digital medium isn't working, and that we have to think of different ways. Like, for example, your company uses the app. There are other people using wearables. There are other people doing digital detoxes, which I know you're not a fan of, and we're going to get to this later on. But there are all of these different approaches that people are taking to help people reduce their stress, increase their creativity, all of these things that MBSR promises to do.
I think a really important thing to note is that the history of mindfulness has always been one of innovation and change. So back in the day, MBSR was a massive innovation. Back in the day, the style of practice in Burma that MBSR effectively comes out of was a massive innovation in the context of monastic practice in Burma. So the history of mindfulness and meditation is full of examples of new styles of practice being designed to better suit people's needs and better suit the culture as it changes. So I just think that this whole area is part of that great story and great history of innovation. The caveat I would put onto that is that I'm a bit of I'm a meditation geek. I'm an old school. Like I really have a lot of love and respect for the mindfulness tradition. I know it very well, and one of my concerns is that not one of my concerns, but what I think is most important is that those are companies who are creating these products, and whether it's through wearables or apps or classes or whatever it may be, I think what makes them the most powerful that they can be is that if they themselves have a deep understanding of mindfulness, and then they express it through a wearable, or they express it through a game or a children's book or whatever it is, rather than just going, oh, shiny bit of technology, all mindfulness is cool at the moment, let's make a thing. I think that is where the sort of confusion and a lot of the confusion and sort of noisiness of this whole space can arise. So that would be my wish. And so it's a bit of a sort of paradox in that sense of like maintaining the purity and integrity and authenticity of what I consider like classical mindfulness practice, while at the same time expressing it through new media and new technology. And it's a challenge, right? It's a real challenge. And I think it's something we think about a lot, is like, how do you balance authenticity with innovation? It is totally possible, but and it really works. The examples I've seen where it works best is where the people making the products have a great deep understanding of the practice in the first place.
Because like I was saying, that there's a lot of literature out there on mindfulness and on meditation, and a lot of it, in my opinion, isn't very good. But there's some there that is really, really outstanding. And of course, there's a lot of scientific data to back this up. Like you're seeing now the datification, aren't you, of mindfulness and meditation, if you like. So that's giving it a support and a crux so that people can invest in this in corporations, or that scientists can talk about it robustly. But I'm just wondering if we're perhaps focusing too much on the role of mindfulness in our life, and actually, because we're talking about how now we live in a digitized world, if maybe we're missing other approaches that might be good that you might have heard of, that you might have been experimenting with?
Sure. I think I absolutely agree that I think we're as a culture, we're in an evangelical moment with regards to mindfulness. So when you or me first get into meditation and mindfulness, and we realize how useful it is for ourselves, one of the first things that happens is that we try to tell all our friends about it. And I see this all the time, right? People who get into mindfulness get really excited about it in a really lovely way. Then they become evangelists for it. And that's sort of where we are now as a society, is that we've sort of only in the last few years really clocked what this whole mindfulness thing is about and its potential. And we're getting a lot of column inches and so on written about it, and sort of supported this sort of hype cycle. And I sort of maybe agree with you in that it sort of resulted in ironically too much attention on it, and more importantly, maybe too much pressure on mindfulness to be like the thing that's going to save us.
That's a good point.
And like I said, like I think it's an important tool in an attention economy. I think a skill set which builds our attentional skills is always going to be useful. So I don't think mindfulness is going to become unuseful at any point. But if you look at mental health and mental well-being in general, we can't ignore things like exercise, daylight, social interaction. Like these are like fundamental things that you often see these sort of listicle articles of like the 5 things you can do to improve your mental health. And too often we just forget the basics, such as do some exercise, eat well, spend some time outside, spend some time with people you care for, do something kind for another person. But instead, like, it's all about, do some meditation, which is like, it's definitely on the list, but I wouldn't say it would be like the first thing to do.
It's interesting as well, isn't it? Because in your book, this is one of the very first things that you speak about in terms of this whole mobile meditation thing, that you're actually thinking, okay, how can I incorporate my practice into my everyday life? And it was almost like on your commute while you were walking to work. So kind of mixing this whole physicality and meditation together. I thought that was really interesting. That really jumped out at me.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately like my ambition just generally is to, and definitely for the book, is to make for people to, we have a history in mindfulness in the meditation world of it being about people telling you what to do, right? So you download an app and then some guy just tells you what to do and you do it. And whether it's a monk telling you what to do or a meditation app, that sort of idea of the sort of the expert knows how to do things and you don't really have any power, you just have to follow instructions. It's still an important teaching model, but I think what I'm excited about is giving people the tools and permission to work it out for themselves, right? So I think we live in a world where so much of our life is very personalized and customized. The fact that we can watch House of Cards all in one weekend if we want to, rather than having to wait for one episode every week. The conventional meditation world is still stuck in a broadcast model, whereas the rest of the world's moved on to iPlayer, right, and onto Netflix. And so creating more ways for people to create a well-being system, whether it includes mindfulness or exercise or whatever, that really fits their life, that really works for them, is a good thing to aspire to. I don't think mindfulness doesn't hold all the answers, And I think it's for us, all of us, to sort of work out what really works for us, what doesn't work for us, and constantly actually ask that question so that we're making sure that we're doing as well as we can.
I love that. That's really interesting. Almost like having a toolkit of approaches to improving the way that we live our life in a digitized society and with our digital devices. But is that where sleepfulness fits into the whole philosophy of what your company is trying to achieve?
The important thing to know about sleepfulness is that it's a sleep app that uses mindfulness rather than a mindfulness app for sleep. And the reason that it sounds a bit technical and nitpicky, but that's really important, because one of the problems with mindfulness at the moment is we've sort of fetishized the process of mindfulness. We've made, whereas the outcome is, for me, is the most important thing. So people don't, my experience of the hundreds of thousands of people who've used our stuff is that very few of those people practice mindfulness to be mindful. People practice mindfulness to sleep better, to have better relationships, to be more concentrated at work, to be more attentive to their husband and wife. And those are the reasons that are important. And so the idea of sleepfulness is simply to, like, we've learned through Buddhify that sleep was effectively the number one problem that our user base had. And it just affects so many other parts of their lives. But if you sort of do some simple studies of Google searches or the App Store, think about the number of people who type in "I want to meditate" versus how do I meditate versus how do I get to sleep? Like, you can't even compare those two numbers, right? So why not make a sleep product that uses all mindfulness techniques rather than front something as being all about mindfulness, and it just happens to help your sleep? So I think this idea of focusing on the outcome rather than the process is really, really important. And it's obviously just as a company, it's a much bigger market for us as well.
For sure.
So that's important. And also, like, there's a bit of irony. There's a bit of a, not irony. There's a bit of a issue again in that mindfulness is all about a lot of mindfulness is about alertness and awakeness, and sleep is obviously the opposite of that. And so we've had to sort of we've done some interesting work around how to. So the type of stuff in sleepfulness is a sort of a subset of the whole family of the mindfulness set of techniques, I guess, that are most suited for sleep. But importantly, I think there's so many different reasons why people can't get to sleep. There's not only the everything from anxiety to restlessness to non-stop mind and all these different types of aspects, and all of those things are things that mindfulness have been working with for years and years, right? So I think this is definitely one of something you'll like. The way we approach product design is that we make products in one of two ways. The first way is to solve a very specific problem. So sleepfulness solves a very specific problem. And the other type of product we make is to evolve the whole area of mindfulness itself. So we're working on one of the products in sort of stealth development, if you like, at the moment, is a product which tries to evolve how we understand meditation. Because I think one of my main, it's a bit of a paradox again, but as someone who makes a decent livelihood from meditation apps, is that one of the unintended consequences and problems of mindfulness apps is that, especially those which are dominated by guided audio, is that we've made people who are really good at meditating by themselves. But historically, a lot of the benefit of meditation practice is because we do it with others, and we've created. It's a problem I think about a lot, which is like the unintended consequences of the success of mindfulness apps like Headspace and Buddhify and Calm and all these ones, is that we've got a generation of meditators who are individuals, and don't have a big social aspect to their practice, and so that's why we're working on something to explore that opportunity, because it means that we can evolve the whole area of mindfulness apps as a whole, because that's something that we care about, not just making the most commercially successful apps around. We're primarily motivated about bringing as much creativity and innovation to the mindfulness space as possible, so that we can broaden the definition of what mindfulness technologies can be.
Fabulous. To make a very, very slight segue, the digital detox movement is really gathering pace, particularly when you have celebrities declare that they're going on digital detoxes, and companies springing up all over the world to facilitate digital detoxes. But you don't believe in them. In fact, you think that the term itself is damaging. And I was wondering why that's the case.
Sure. Well, I think there is value to spending time away from one's devices. I'm not denying the value of that. But there's two issues. One is, I guess, as you intimate, the word calling it a digital detox implies that our technologies are toxic, which is a really, really, really big problem. Because if we pathologize our comms technologies or our devices in this kind of way, then like it's hardly as like it's given that how much they underpin our lifestyles, our economy, and our societies, then if the number one sort of driving force behind all these things is something that we think is toxic, then we're heading towards a giant car crash, basically. So yeah, like I don't. If that's our only strategy, if your only strategy to deal with the stresses of your phone is to throw it in the river, then good luck. But I think we have to, alongside the appropriate amount of spending time away and turning things off, we also just have to actually improve our relationship with our device as well, so that we can allow them to be what I call mind positive rather than stressful or anxiety inducing or whatever it is for you. Because I don't want, I don't want to, like, this is a very strong analogy, so I use it with caution, but I think it's a bit like, actually, I'm not going to say that at all. Yeah, so I talk about, like, in the context of this area, I talk about 3 R's. So retreat, which is the digital detox. So turning everything off, taking some time away. I talk about relating, so improving our relationship to technology. So that a lot of that is the bulk of the sort of the techniques in the book, which involve digital devices and technologies, show you how you can actually use these things to be supportive of ourselves. And then the third R is redesign, which is the more higher level industrial side things, which is where you start including users' well-being in the design of software and hardware. And I don't have the answers for all of that, but I think as an individual user, the best we can do is know when it's appropriate to turn stuff off. When it's not, when stuff is on, then we at least have a skillful relationship with the devices. And as consumers, we're aware that the industries are often trying to manipulate our attention. So if we can hold all those things at the same time, then we give ourselves the best sort of holistic chance, I think, rather than only having a single binary, crude strategy of detox.
How do you, Rowan, how do you every day create a positive relationship, not just with technology, but also with digitized society? And how do you recommend other people go about doing that?
I don't have a strict regime, but what I do have is the level of self-awareness, so that if I am playing with my 10-week-old son and I notice myself getting bored and wanting to check Twitter, then I'm like, whoa, that is a problem, right?
Yeah.
So like the key, the superpower is the awareness there. And then noticing that that's happening, and then being able to having the skill to not necessarily follow the habit. One thing I think that is important is to, with regards to the whole society aspect, is to start with the perspective that it's not a problem. Because I think if we start with the attitude that we're constantly going to be in conflict with it, then we'll that's what we'll see, right? So if we start with an optimistic point of view and perspective that actually technology is broadly on our side, then that's often a good place to start. And then couple that with the self-awareness that when we notice our attention being taken away in ways that we wouldn't necessarily want. So whether you're having conversation or dinner with your partner, or spending time with your children, or on a date, or at work, whatever it is, and you notice your mind being pulled away to check Twitter or check out of that conversation entirely, then if we didn't have that awareness in the first place, then we wouldn't see that pattern. So that's sort of a key thing. And there's something I think sort of slightly gets underexplored actually, which is how it's something, for example, when I was writing the book, and I had to, like, writing a book requires a lot of concentration and focused attention. And it was a really good opportunity for me to sort of see how my distractions work. So I studied paid a lot of attention to when I sat down to write my 2,000 words, and suddenly I'd be doing something entirely different. And it's easy to blame the technology's fault for that. And the technology definitely is a contributor. It makes it very frictionless to get distracted. But what I found most powerful was actually becoming aware of how I felt before the distraction happened. And what I found typically was that I was bored, I was lonely, I was feeling maybe a bit sad. And as a result, my mind, effectively in a compassionate act, went out to distract myself and look at Twitter or check my email as a way to fix my problem, which was actually the sadness or the loneliness or the boredom. But when you have that level of ability to notice the mind state, the emotional state, and be able to just let that go and let it just work its way out, then that is then the sort of, you take away the power from the devices to even sort of pull you away in the first place. So that, but I'm the mindfulness guy, right? So my answer is basically do loads of mindfulness. But the great thing about a baby or a partner who's really straightforward with you is that you'll know pretty soon when your attentional, when how you're attending to someone isn't okay. So if you're having dinner with your partner, and then she notices that you're in the middle of an important story that she's telling you, that you just go and see what's happening in the Arsenal game, like that, that you'll end up sleeping on the sofa, right? So there's a nice feedback. There's a really nice, simple feedback loop which shows you the negative impact of using your attention in those ways. And so, and likewise with what's been really lovely about becoming a father just recently is that it's a whole new domain of practice for me. It's a whole new area to explore and discover for how to use the skills that I already have in different ways. And it's so clear, like when a newborn baby like really demands you to be present with it, and that is a really making sure that you have in some way you have some sort of feedback for how your sort of attention and awareness is doing. And yeah, like not everyone can have a newborn baby, or not everyone's in a relationship, but to do that. But I think just finding what works, like how, like if being present is important to you, or if being just, I would put it down to this: like, what is the most important quality in your life at any one time? So it can be anything from concentration, connection with others, presence, being able to deal with difficult emotion, body awareness, whatever it is, right? So just choose one or quality that is important to you, and then just check it, like during the day. Let's score yourself from 1 to 5. Like during the day, like, okay, during this activity, my body awareness is rubbish. During this activity, my body awareness is really high. And then just use that information to improve it. So this whole thing about focusing on the result. So, and having some way of sort of tracking how you're doing. So I think that's for me if anything, that is my regime. It isn't an actual, I think I'm very wary of telling people what to do. And also you come across as a bit of a douchebag if you say, well, I only check my emails between 1 and 2 p.m. Aren't I great? It's like, well, that's all very well. I can't really, like, I understand why that advice is, why that kind of stuff is useful, but just me telling you to do that makes no sense, because my life is completely different to your life. And so there's only much transferable skill set you can apply to that. But what is transferable is like understanding what are the positive qualities you want in your life, and track them somehow, and and notice what helps them grow, and notice what helps them not grow, and keep doing the things that help them grow, and maybe stop doing the things that don't. And that for me is like the most useful and simple thing to do.
Fabulous. My penultimate question links back to a few things you've been speaking about today, and you talked about this whole idea of attention, and this come up again and again. But again, in this digitized age in which we're living and working now, and particularly as a lot of workers are facing the threat of, say, technological unemployment, etc., what do you think is the most important human quality that we possess in this digital age, and how can we cultivate it?
Well, that's a
end on the big one.
Wow, boom! How about that? I would sort of probably say giving a damn, and like caring how, like, sort of whether it's, yeah, like as you implied in your question, whether it's these fears of robots taking over our jobs, or Google making us stupid, or social media creating ADHD, all these sort of fears that, however valid they are or they aren't, I think caring about one's own well-being and mental well-being, and not just saying, oh, that's just how it is. Like recognizing that we actually have some ability to we have some agency. We have some, like, we don't live in a world where we're inevitably going to become like just ruined sort of emotionally and mentally by all this stuff. Because then, like, if you care about it and you're like, I say it's a combination of giving them and curiosity and going, actually, what is the thing that really helps me? What are the behaviors that actually don't help me? Caring about that, being interested in that. And then sometimes, yeah, you will find that it's about, for you, it might be throwing the phone in the river, or for you, for another person, it might be working out how to feel a sense of genuine person-to-person connection whilst browsing Twitter or Instagram or checking Snapchat or whatever. And like, so like recognizing really like, it sounds stupid that we should care about our well-being, but I think that's really important, because then when you care about it and you recognize the importance of it, then you do everything you can to protect it, right? And so that would be, if it was one thing, yeah, maybe that would be it.
And having that gumption to care about, like you say, your own emotional and psychological well-being, that, you know, that does bring out your own unique human qualities to either solve a problem or to
exactly,
you know,
and not just rolling over and going, hey, well, that's the internet, deal with it. I think that's just as a small, well, not a small example, a massive example. So like if you think of a company like most powerful, well, Facebook aside, most powerful tech, well, probably more powerful than Facebook, so Google, like the whole area of sort of YouTube comments, right, which is some of the most disgraceful, disgusting, abusive part of our modern culture, and Google's position on it is broadly, hey, well, that's just what it's like. People are dicks. But at the same time, they're putting Wi-Fi on balloons. They're building driverless cars. They're doing these incredible technological feats, but they can't solve a problem like abusive, misogynistic YouTube comments. Is that because that's an impossible problem to solve, or is it because they don't give a damn, or it's too much hassle to deal with? I think we all too easily default to this idea of, well, that's what the internet's like. I think that's not good enough. And so if we just throw our hand, as from a person, that's an industry global perspective, but on an individual perspective, if we just say, well, iPhones are addictive, that's just what it's like, then that's not giving us a chance, right? So we have to give ourselves a chance.
Fantastic. Rohan, we've unfortunately come to the end of the interview. Where can people find out more about you and your work?
All sorts of places. So my company is called Mindfulness Everywhere. We're easily found mindfulnesseverywhere.io. Through Buddhify and Sleepfulness now, you can get a taste of the kind of stuff we do, and also obviously through the book This Is Happening, which is out in, you have a really global audience, so it's worth mentioning. It's out currently in the UK and Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and some other places, but the American version and Canadian version doesn't come out until a little bit later. We haven't announced the dates for that. And a German language version comes out in April. But it is available in the UK if you're super keen. But it should be out in a country near you. If not right now, then soon.
Brilliant. Well, look, Rohan Gunatillake, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Really, really great.